Tiếp nha. The little mermaid longed to see the prince again. She became so sad that eventually she told her sisters about the prince and how she had fallen in love with him. I know where his palace is, said the oldest sister. I'll show you. Gail, Gail. After that, the little mermaid swam to the surface every day. She gazed at the palace, hoping to catch a glimpse of the prince. Father, could I become human if I wanted to? No, you can't. She asked the king one day. The only way, my little one, said the king gently, is if a human falls in love with you. Min ơi, Min không có thành người cá đâu. But the little mermaid could not forget the prince. She decided to visit the sea witch. I can make a potion to make you human, hissed the witch, but I will take your beautiful voice as my payment. If you win the true love of the prince, only then will you get your voice back. The little mermaid loved the prince so much that she agreed. She swam to the prince's palace and drank the potion. She fell into a deep sleep. Khoái trời. Tiếp nha. When she woke up, she was lying on the beach, dressed in beautiful clothes. Where her shiny tail had been, she now had a pair of pale human legs. The little mermaid tried to stand, but her new legs wobbled and she stumbled on the sand. Yeah. As she fell, two strong arms reached out and caught her. The little mermaid looked up. It was the prince! She tried to speak, but her voice has gone, and she could only smile at her handsome rescuer. Đừng buồn Min ơi. The silent, beautiful, and mysterious stranger fascinated the prince. He grew very fond of the little mermaid and spent his afternoons with her around the palace. One day, the prince told the little mermaid that he was getting married to the princess. My parents want me to do this, he sighed sadly. But I loved another girl. I don't know who she is, but she once rescued me from the sea. The little mermaid was devastated, but without a voice. How could she tell the prince that she was that girl? A few days before the wedding, the prince asked the little mermaid to take a walk with him along the beach. Once I'm married, I won't be able to spend so much time with you, he told her. The little maid nodded sadly. Gì trời, ông đang bực hay ông đang vui vậy? Chịu luôn á. Sao không biết luôn á. She had been dreading this happening. As they walked across the sand, a fierce wind suddenly whipped along the shore. A huge wave crashed over the prince and the little mermaid, washing them out to sea. Without thinking, the little mermaid dived beneath the churning waves and grabbed the prince. As the prince coughing and spluttering on the sand, he stared at the little mermaid. You're the girl who saved me before, he cried. I remember now. The little mermaid smiled and nodded. I can't marry the princess. I love you, he sighed. I don't care if you can't speak. Will you marry me? The little mermaid had never felt so joyful, and as the prince kissed her, something magical happened. She could feel her voice returning. Bubbling with excitement, she cried out, Yes, I will marry you! The happy couple were married the very next day. The little mermaid's dreams had come true, but she could never forget her family or that she had once been a mermaid. Min trời ơi. Vui không? Vui không? Thôi mồ hôi một kề ghê quá. Đọc tiếp nha. We'll dive into the next story. Sleeping Beauty. Từ từ là ra đọc mới. Kéo. I can't make this up. Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen. When the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, the king and queen were filled with joy and decided to hold a christening feast to celebrate. They invited their friends, and all the kings, queens, princes, and princesses from other kingdoms all over the land. 5 good fairies lived in the kingdom, and the king wanted them to be godmothers to his daughter. One of these fairies was very old, and no one had seen her in years or even knew where she was. So when the king sent out the invitations to his daughter's christening, he invited only the 4 young fairies. The day of the christening arrived. It was a joyous occasion, and the palace was full of laughter and dancing. After the delicious feast, the 4 good fairies gave the princess their magical gifts. Bending over the crib, the first fairy waved her wand and said, "You shall be kind and considerate." The second fairy said, "You shall be beautiful and loving." Trời ơi, nó buồn Trang ơi, nó cứ khóc à. Nó la nè. Không đọc nữa. Không đọc nữa.
Cho nó xem hình đi.
Nè. Đó. The third fairy said, "You shall be clever and thoughtful." The baby girl was promised everything in the world that you could wish for. But just as the third fairy finished giving her gift, there was a loud bang, and the palace doors flew open. It was the old fairy. She was furious because she hadn't been invited to the feast. She rushed over to the sleeping baby and waved her wand, casting a curse upon the child. "One day, the king's daughter shall prick her daughter on the spindle and fall down dead," she screeched, and then she left. The guests fell silent at these terrible words, and the queen burst into tears. The fourth fairy had not yet given her gift. "Dear queen, please do not weep. I cannot undo the curse, but I can soften it," she said. She walked to the crib and waved her wand. "The princess will prick her finger on the spindle, but she will not die. Instead, the princess and everyone within the palace and its grounds will fall into a deep sleep that will last for 100 years. Whoa! The king thanked the fairy for her kindness and then, to protect his daughter, ordered that every spindle in the kingdom be burnt. The years passed, and the princess grew into a beautiful and kind young woman, just as the fairies had promised. Alright. One day, to amuse herself, the princess decided to explore the rooms in the palace that she had never been in before. After a while, she came to a little door at the top of a tall tower. Inside, there was an old woman working at her spinning wheel. The princess didn't know that the woman was really the old fairy in disguise. "What are you doing?" the princess asked curiously. "I'm spinning thread, dear child," replied the woman. "Can I try?" said the princess. No sooner had she touched the spindle than she pricked her finger and fell into a deep, deep sleep. The strange quietness came over the palace, from the gardens to the tallest tower, and the king and queen began to yawn. Before long, every living thing within the castle walls had fallen into a deep, deep sleep. As time passed, a hedge of thorns sprang up around the palace. It grew higher and thicker every year until only the tallest towers could be seen above it. The story of the beautiful princess that lay sleeping within its walls spread throughout the land. She became known as Sleeping Beauty. Girl, you cannot be Sleeping Beauty. You cannot. No. You sweat all the time. Oh my god. Many princes tried to break through the thorns to rescue Sleeping Beauty, but none were successful. The thorn hedge was too thick. Exactly 100 years after the princess had fallen asleep, a handsome prince, having heard the story of Sleeping Beauty, decided to try and break the curse and awaken the sleeping princess. The prince didn't know that fairy spell was coming to its end. As he pushed against the thick hedge, every thorn turned into a beautiful rose, and a path magically formed to let him pass. Soon the prince came to the palace. Not a sound could be heard anywhere. He saw people and animals asleep in every room. At last, he found a tiny room in the tower where Sleeping Beauty lay. The prince looked at her in wonder and then kissed her gently. The sleeping princess opened her eyes and smiled up at the prince. With that one look, they found love. All around the palace, other people were waking up. The king and queen stirred from their deep sleep and were overjoyed to see their daughter awake. They welcomed the handsome prince who had found their princess. The palace was once again filled with laughter and joy. The king called for a huge wedding feast to be prepared, and he invited everyone in the entire kingdom. Sleeping Beauty married her handsome prince, and they lived happily ever after. Sao? Sao? Trời ơi. Next story. Monsters and many dirty men, on and on and on. The Frog Prince. There was once a princess with a smile more dazzling than the sun. She lived with her father, the king, in a palace surrounded by thick woods. When the weather was very hot, the princess would walk into the shade of the forest and sit by a pond. There, she would take out her favorite toy, a golden ball that her father had given her. Over and over, she would throw it up into the air and catch it again. One day, the ball slipped from her hand and fell into the pond with a splash. The pond was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. My beautiful golden ball, sobbed the princess. She cried as if her heart would break, her tears dropping onto the water. The princess thought her favorite toy was lost forever. An ugly, speckled frog popped his head out of the water. Why are you crying? He asked. I have charged my precious golden ball into the water, she cried. What will you give me if I fetch it back for you? Asked the frog. You may have my jewels and pearls, even the crown on my head, sobbed the unhappy princess. I don't need any of those things, said the frog. If you promise to care for me and be my friend, let me share food from your plate and sleep on your pillow, then I'll bring back your golden ball. I promise, said the princess, but she didn't really mean it. As the frog swam down into the murky water, she thought, he's only a silly old frog. I won't have to do any of those things. When the frog swam back up with the ball, she snatched it from him and ran all the way back to the palace. That evening, the princess was having dinner with her family when there was a knock on the door. Princess, let me in, called a croaky voice. When the princess went to open the door, she was horrified to find a speckled frog sitting in a puddle of water. She slammed the door and hurried back to the table. Why do you look so frightened? Said the king. Was it a witch? No, father, it was a frog, replied the princess. What does a frog want with you? Asked the puzzled king. Ơi, her lady. Trời ơi. The princess told her father all about losing the ball and the promise she had made to the frog. Princesses always keep their promises, my dear, insisted the king. Let the frog in and make him welcome. The princess did as she was told. As soon as the frog hopped through the door, she asked to be lifted up onto the princess's plate so that he could share her food. When the frog saw the look of disgust on the princess's face, he said, Princess, princess, fair and sweet, you made a special vow to be my friend and share my food, so don't you forget it now. The king was so annoyed to see his daughter acting so rudely. This frog helped you when you were in trouble, he said. You made him a promise, and now you must keep it. The princess had no choice. She lifted the damp frog onto her plate and watched as he nibbled at her food. For the rest of the day, the frog followed the princess everywhere she went. She hoped that he would go back to his pond when it was time for bed, but he did not. When darkness fell, the frog yawned and stretched. I'm tired, he said. Take me to your room and let me sleep on your silken pillow. The princess was horrified. No, I won't, she said. Go back to your pond, you slimy creature, and leave me alone. The patient frog sang, Princess, princess, fair and sweet, you made a special vow to be my friend and share your food, so don't you forget it now. The princess had no choice but to take him to her room. She couldn't bear the thought of sleeping next to him, though, so instead of placing him on her pillow, she put him in a corner on the floor. Then she climbed into her bed and laid her head down on the silken pillow and went to sleep. After a while, the frog jumped onto the bed. It's draughty on the floor. Let me sleep on your pillow as you promised, he said. The sleepy princess felt more annoyed than ever. She picked up the frog and hurled him across the room, where he landed with a smack on the floor. The frog lay there dazed and helpless. The princess shook herself properly awake and saw the frog laying still. She was suddenly filled with pity. She couldn't bear the thought that she might have hurt the poor thing. Oh, you poor darling, she cried, and she picked him up and kissed him. The frog transformed into a handsome young prince. Sweet princess, he cried, I was bewitched, and your tender kiss had broken the curse. The prince and princess soon fell in love and were married. They often walked in the shady forest together and sat by a pond, tossing the golden ball back and forth and smiling at how they first met.
Xàm quá Miên ơi. Miên xàm quá.
This fucking book is filled with stupid stories. The illustrations, though.
Ghê. Tự lấy luôn, tự lấy tự đọc đi. Tự lấy tự đọc luôn. Một hơi một kề ghê quá.
Con người ơi ướt sũng. Trời ơi, người ướt lắm.
Người ướt đó hả? Thì bật quạt to lên.
Ôi trời ơi. Hỏi thân. Điên.
Vui quá.
Đọc sách đi, đọc sách đi. She's kicking her feet and everything. God.